The sand was warm. Megan O'Brien spread her worn beach towel across it with the precision of someone laying down a perimeter, her movements deliberate and efficient as the Norfolk afternoon heat pressed down on the public access point. 30 feet away, Major Collins sat alone by the dunes, his golden retriever resting its head on the veteran's leg, both of them still as weathered driftwood. She adjusted her sunglasses and settled into her observation post, her back against the lifeguard station's shadow, knees bent as if she were simply another civilian enjoying the coast. The salt air carried voices, families, teenagers, the distant call of gulls, but her attention narrowed to a single point on the shoreline where a blind man waited for something he didn't know was coming. 3 weeks. 21 days of watching him come to this beach every Saturday and Wednesday, always the same time, always the same spot. Her nursing credentials at Seattle General were genuine enough, 5 years of emergency medicine, 2 commendations for field response, a spotless record, but the real reason she'd taken this civilian contract was sitting 30 feet away, his service dog the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. Captain Megan O'Brien had spent 18 months in Tikrit under his command. She had held her son's younger brother, a lance corporal named Danny Hernandez, while his lungs filled with fluid from an IED shrapnel wound. Major Collins had ordered the evacuation. Major Collins had sat in the hospital tent 3 hours later and told her there was nothing anyone could have done differently. She had believed him then. She still believed him now. What she didn't believe was that he should be sitting alone by Norfolk's dunes with no one watching his six. She pulled the jacket closer despite the 93-degree heat, feeling the faded unit patch against her ribs like a talisman. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Dark Horse Company. The patch was smaller than a postage stamp, sewn inside her jacket lining in the space between her heart and the outside world. It was the patch her son had worn on his sleeve every day of his deployment. It was the patch that had been folded into the flag they handed her at Arlington. She didn't look at it anymore. She only felt it there, a weight that never quite lifted, a reminder of the man sitting by the dunes who had done everything right and still lost 19 people under his command. Who had watched them die and kept commanding anyway. Who had come home and chosen to sit alone on a beach with a dog instead of taking the pension and disappearing like most of them did. Her eyes tracked the beach like a tactical assessment. The north access point had 2 exits, the pavilion stairs and the emergency vehicle ramp. The south end narrowed to rockier terrain that channeled foot traffic into a single bottleneck. The lifeguard stand gave her elevation and sight lines. The parking lot beyond was visible from her position, though she would need to move 20 feet west to see the full perimeter. She'd been running this surveillance for long enough that the pattern was automatic now: threat assessment, exit routes, backup positions, communication lines. Habits from a different life. Habits that had saved lives in Tikrit. Habits that were supposed to stay buried with the people who had trained her to use them. The golden retriever lifted its head. A signal. Megan's hand moved to her sunglasses, adjusting them though they didn't need adjusting, her eyes still following the tree line above the dunes. A man in a polo shirt and khakis was walking the waterline, clipboard pressed against his chest, his posture broadcasting authority like a radio station. Beach manager Derek Pierce, she'd learned his name and position in the first week, had studied the beach's organizational structure and power dynamics the way she once studied insurgent communication networks. Pierce walked like he owned the sand. Like the veterans and civilians and families scattered across it existed only by his permission. He was stopping now, pausing beside the volleyball court setup, pointing at something. Making notes. His eyes were on the major's position. Megan's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Not a tremor, not a visible reaction, just the subtle contraction of muscle that came from clenching her molars together hard enough to taste copper. She had spent for years in field medicine learning to control her physical responses. You don't tremble when a soldier is exsanguinating. You don't freeze when the power goes out in a forward operating base and you're working on a compound fracture by flashlight. You don't show fear when the mortars start falling outside the perimeter. Control is armor. Control is the only thing that keeps you standing when everything else is falling apart. So she didn't tremble. She adjusted her position on the towel, shifting her weight as if she were simply trying to find a more comfortable angle, and her hand rested on the jacket's collar, feeling the patch underneath. Pierce was talking on his phone now, one hand gesturing toward the Major. His expression had shifted into something that looked like a smile, though the word didn't fit the angle of his jaw or the direction of his eyes. She'd seen that expression before. Not in hospitals or clinics. In command centers during briefings. In the faces of people about to make decisions that would ripple outward and destroy other people's lives. In the face of her son's company commander, 3 hours after the IED, holding the casualty report in hands that weren't quite steady. She understood that expression. It was the expression of someone enjoying power. Someone who had just realized they had found something to exercise it on. The retriever made a soft sound, a whine that barely carried across the sand. Major Collins reached down and touched the dog's head with the same careful precision that Megan had seen him use with 4 lines and wound assessments in the trauma tent. He didn't know she was watching. He didn't know that a captain with legitimate nursing credentials and a faded unit patch sewn inside her jacket had spent 3 weeks learning his schedule, documenting the routes he took to the beach, noting the hours when the parking lot was busiest and when it cleared. He didn't know that his former medical officer had burned through 3 months of saved leave to take this contract. He didn't know that somewhere in a Pentagon office, someone very high up had made a phone call that resulted in his protection detail masquerading as a civilian nurse with a beach towel and sunglasses. The thing he also didn't know was that the protection detail was about to become a lot more complicated. Pierce ended his phone call. He was walking now, moving along the waterline with purpose, his pace accelerating. The clipboard was no longer casual. The polo shirt and professional demeanor didn't change, but his trajectory was now aimed directly at the Major like a predetermined course. 2 other people were following him, younger men in matching uniforms, the kind of uniforms that implied employment but not the kind that suggested much in the way of critical thinking. Megan stood. Not suddenly. Not with alarm. She simply rose from her towel with the fluid ease of someone who had decided the sun was too intense, who wanted to move into the shade, who happened to be moving in a direction that would place her between Pierce and his target in approximately 42 seconds. Her hands were steady as she folded the towel. Muscle memory took over, the kind of muscle memory that came from folding tactical gear in the field, from moving with intention in spaces where intention mattered. She slung the towel across her shoulder in a way that looked casual and allowed her right hand to be free. She adjusted her sunglasses again, the lenses dark enough that no one could trace the direction of her gaze, and started walking toward the water with the purposeless drift of a sunbather who had simply tired of sitting still. The sound of her footsteps on the sand was almost nothing. The beach swallowed sound, muffled it, turned everything into a soft percussion that belonged to the space itself. But she heard it. She heard everything. The distant helicopter crossing the sky somewhere inland, a medical evacuation probably, the rhythmic slice of the rotors like a metronome counting down to something. The seagulls overhead calling out territorial markers. The retriever's breathing, steady, trained, the breath of a military working dog who had learned to stay calm in situations that would shatter most civilians into panic. The sound of Pierce's voice now, carrying across the dunes as he picked up his pace. Loud. Deliberate. The kind of loud that was designed to be heard by everyone on the beach, not just the man he was walking toward. She was close enough now that she could see the tension in Major Collins's shoulders, the way his hand had stopped petting the dog. He'd heard it too. He'd heard the tone of a voice carrying authority like a weapon. He'd heard the footsteps on sand, 3 sets, moving with the coordination of people who'd been given instructions. He'd heard the message underneath the sound before the words even came. She kept walking, her pace unchanged, her trajectory still aimed for the waterline but now angled to intersect with the point where Pierce would arrive. She was a civilian. Just a nurse with a beach towel. Just someone who happened to be in the wrong place at the right time. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Derek Pierce had made a phone call less than 90 seconds ago. The worst part was that someone on the other end of that phone had decided to take action. The worst part was that Megan O'Brien, Captain, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, decorated trauma surgeon and former Special Operations Medical Officer, was about to watch a man use institutional power to destroy someone else's quiet afternoon, and she was going to have to decide how to respond without burning through the protection detail that had taken 6 months to establish. The first word out of Pierce's mouth made her jaw tighten again. Beach manager Derek Pierce approached with 2 sunburned tourists in polo shirts, their voices carrying across the sand like seagulls fighting over scraps. Megan watched from her position near the dunes, her worn beach towel still spread exactly where she'd laid it 3 weeks ago. The same spot. The same time. The same careful distance from Major Collins and his service dog, Shadow. Pierce's voice cut through the afternoon like a blade. "Sir, several guests have complained about your dog. This is a no-pets beach, and frankly, you're taking up premium space that paying cabana renters could use." He didn't lower his voice. He amplified it. The words were a weapon, and the beach crowd was his audience. Major Collins's hand found Shadow's head. The Major's fingers trembled, not from fear, but from confusion. He'd been coming to this public access point for 8 months. The sign said public. The law said service animals were exempt. None of that mattered now. One of the tourists laughed. The sound carried the weight of absolute certainty. Probably faking it for sympathy. "I've seen these scammers before. You wouldn't believe how many fake vets milk the system." He elbowed his friend, both of them grinning like they'd just identified a con artist at a casino. Pierce smirked. He turned to face the gathering crowd, families with children, couples on blankets, lifeguards watching from their tower. His next words were theater. "We have standards here, and if you can't follow simple posted rules, you'll need to leave." He paused. "Let it settle. Some people think the rules don't apply to them. That's not how we operate." Megan stood. Her movements were economical, measured. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She simply rose from her towel and walked across the sand toward the Major, her shadow stretching long behind her in the late afternoon light. The moment she knelt beside him, the crowd's energy shifted. A woman whispered something to her daughter. The daughter stared. Megan's hands moved with surgical precision, folding the Major's beach chair, the same aluminum chair with the frayed straps that he'd brought 3 times a week for 7 months. Click. Snap. Done. She gathered his cane. She helped him gather the small bag that held his sunscreen and water bottle. Her face revealed nothing. Not anger. Not frustration. Not even the smallest flicker of emotion. Her jaw clenched once, a single tightening of muscle that lasted maybe 2 seconds, and then her expression returned to the professional calm of someone simply assisting a patron at a public facility. Pierce wasn't satisfied with silence. He reached for his radio and made a show of pressing the button. "Security, this is Pierce. I'm removing a non-compliant patron from the premium beach area. Stand by." Static crackled back. An affirmation. He watched Megan with the satisfaction of a man who'd just executed a perfect power play. "Another bleeding heart," Pierce announced to no one in particular, but to everyone within earshot. "These entitled types think rules don't apply to their charity cases. We're running a business here, not a social services department." A mother pulled her children away from their sandcastle. They didn't understand what was happening, but they understood the tone. The shame in the air was spreading like a toxin. The Major's hands shook as he stood. His cane tapped against the sand, tap, 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 the sound of a man trying to maintain dignity while being systematically humiliated in front of strangers. Megan guided him with one hand at his elbow, her touch light but certain. The kind of touch that said, "I have you. You're not alone in this." Pierce stepped directly into their path. 6 feet tall. Polo shirt the color of dried blood. Satisfaction radiating off him like heat shimmer off asphalt. "And you, Miss Nightingale," he said, his voice dropping into a register that was somehow more dangerous than the shouting. "Might want to remember whose beach you're on. I've noticed you here quite a bit. Loitering isn't appreciated either. We have paying customers. They don't appreciate the ambience of charity work." Megan met his eyes. Her gaze was a flat, fathomless blue-gray, the color of cold ocean water. No expression. No reaction. No sign that his words had struck anything living inside her. She simply looked at him as if he were an obstacle in the path, cataloguing his dimensions before deciding how best to move around him. Then she guided Major Collins past him. Not around him. Past him. Their shoulders didn't touch, but the proximity was deliberate. A refusal to cower. A refusal to validate his authority through deference. The crowd watched. Phones came out. This was the kind of moment people recorded without quite understanding why. Something was happening at the Norfolk public beach, and the internet would want to know about it. That evening, Megan sat alone on the public access bench, the one that faced the water, the one that nobody technically owned. Other beachgoers moved away when she arrived, creating an invisible buffer zone around her. A teenage lifeguard whispered to his colleague, both glancing her way. The message was clear: this woman was radioactive now. She didn't move. She didn't leave. She sat on the bench as the sun dropped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that looked almost violent in their intensity. Her jacket hung over her shoulders despite the warm evening. Inside the lining, against the fabric closest to her ribs, was the unit patch. Faded. Threadbare. Sewn by her own hands 8 years ago after the telegram arrived. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Dark Horse Company. The insignia stitched with the kind of precision that came from muscle memory, hands that had once sutured 3 soldiers back together under direct fire knew how to thread a needle through cloth. The patch held a name she no longer said aloud. Her son. 23 years old. And 0311, a rifleman. Dead in Tikrit when a roadside device detonated beneath his Humvee. DOA at the field hospital where she'd been stationed for the next 18 hours, not knowing. Not knowing until the chaplain found her in the trauma bay. The major was Major Collins. The major who'd sent her son into that Humvee. The major who'd ordered the patrol. The major who'd carried that weight for 8 years, blind now, unable to see anything except the ghosts of the men he'd commanded. She'd been assigned to protect him. That was the official version. Naval intelligence had detected foreign actors interested in the major's testimony about procurement fraud in the supply chain. Certain officials wanted him silenced. Certain other officials wanted him alive to talk. Megan had gotten the assignment because she had the clearance, the medical skills, and the one thing no one could say out loud, a personal investment in keeping the major breathing. But now Derek Pierce had burned that investment to the ground. That night in her hotel room, she sat on the edge of the bed with the jacket spread across her lap. The patch was barely visible, just a shadow of embroidery against the dark lining. She stared at it for 4 hours. She didn't cry. She didn't allow herself that. Crying was a luxury. Crying was what people did when they still believed the world operated on principles of fairness. Instead, she stared at the stitches her own hands had made and understood what was about to happen. Her cover was already compromised. Pierce's public demonstration of her involvement with the major, calling her out, banning her from the beach, would trigger questions. Naval intelligence would have to pull her. The protection detail would dissolve. The major would be vulnerable again. And Derek Pierce, who'd spent the afternoon performing dominance in front of a beach full of strangers, had no idea he'd just ended something that took 6 months to establish. The next morning brought the confirmation she'd been dreading. Her phone rang at 6:02 a.m. Blocked number. A voice she recognized from the intelligence briefings: "Captain, you've been made. Your cover is compromised. Stand down the protection detail immediately. You'll be extracted within 24 hours. Do not return to the beach. Do not contact the asset. Acknowledge." She acknowledged. She packed her belongings into the same duffel bag she'd arrived with. She left the beach towel folded on the hotel room chair at the worn, frayed thing that had served as her camouflage for 3 weeks. She didn't look back at the window that faced the ocean. The following Saturday, Megan arrived at the beach before dawn. The sand was still dark, the ocean a black mirror. By noon, everything had changed. Vendor trucks lined the parking lot, catering companies, sound equipment, sponsor banners for a corporate volleyball tournament. Derek Pierce stood on a makeshift platform near the net, his voice amplified through a megaphone that crackled and squealed. Tighter on that banner. These are Fortune 500 companies. We're talking 6 figures in sponsorship. He moved through the setup like a conductor, his polo shirt pressed sharp as a knife, his sunglasses expensive enough to fund a month's clinical supplies at Seattle General. The way he gestured made it clear this was his kingdom, every grain of sand subject to his approval. Megan had positioned herself near the dunes where Major Collins sat with his service dog, the same spot where they'd established their rhythm 3 weeks prior. The crowd had grown, cabana renters, day trippers, families with children building castles near the waterline. The tournament would start in an hour. Security staff in matching shirts moved through the crowd with clipboards. The whistle blew. For teenagers sprinted onto the sand court. Serves and blocks, the sound of the ball smacking palms. Megan watched from her bench, 20 yards back, monitoring the water's edge where a lifeguard sat in a tower. Her attention was everywhere and nowhere. The vigilance of someone who'd run combat triage in Tikrit had never really switched off. That was when the boy collapsed. One moment he was mid-jump on the court. The next, he crumpled like someone had cut his strings. His hand clutched his chest. His mouth opened but no sound came out, just the gasping, the desperate wheeze of someone whose lungs had forgotten how to work. "Get back," someone screamed. Megan was already moving. The crowd parted for her instinctively, perhaps because she moved with the terrifying fluid precision of apex predators, or perhaps because panic recognizes competence when it sees it. She dropped to her knees beside the boy. His shirt was soaked through with sweat. His breathing was labored, asymmetrical, his right side rising shallow while his left barely moved. Tension pneumothorax. The recognition hit her like a toggle switch. She could see it in his ribs, in the strain pattern of his intercostal muscles. Air in his chest cavity collapsing his lung. Every breath he took was pulling him deeper into suffocation. "Does anyone have a pen?" Her voice was steady, authoritative. Hollow barrel. Ballpoint. A teenager thrust one at her. She uncapped it, reversed it, measured by either distance to the second intercostal space at the midclavicular line. She'd done this 4 times in Tikrit. Once in the back of a Humvee under fire. Once in a tent lit by chemical lights while mortars fell outside. The hands moved on muscle memory older than conscious thought. The needle went in. There was a hiss, that specific sound of air escaping, the sound of pressure releasing, the sound of a lung that could finally expand. The boy's breathing changed immediately. Deeper. Slower. His shoulders dropped. His eyes, which had been locked in panic, started to focus. "Stay with me," Megan said quietly. "You're okay now. Just breathe. Count with me. 1, 2, 3. His chest rose and fell in rhythm with her voice. His color shifted from gray-blue back toward human. A lifeguard was calling 911, his radio crackling back with ETA 8 minutes. By the time the ambulance arrived, the boy would be stable. By the time he reached the hospital, the emergency team would know what she'd already diagnosed. By the time Derek Pierce shoved through the crowd, his face purple, everything had changed again. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice came through louder than it should, louder than the concern warranted, loud enough that everyone within 30 yards turned to stare. "You're not a licensed medical professional on MY Beach. That's assault, and I'm calling the police." Megan didn't look up. She stayed focused on the boy, keeping her voice in the calm register that meant "Don't panic, everything's handled." Pierce was breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists. She could feel his rage the way you feel temperature change when you walk from sunlight into shadow. "You just committed a felony," Pierce continued, already pulling out his phone. "This is documented. Multiple witnesses. I'm calling my brother-in-law, his district counsel, and we're building a case starting right now." The ambulance siren grew closer, that wailing sound cutting through the beach crowd like a scalpel through anesthetized skin. Pierce's finger moved across his phone screen, still talking, already narrating events into his voice memo, already building his case sentence by sentence. His other hand was pressing another number. "Yeah, it's Derek. I need you to listen to this carefully. We've got a trespasser on my property who just performed unauthorized medical procedures on a minor. Yes. On the beach. I have 40 witnesses. I need you to file with the state nursing board, and I want a police report on file by end of business." The paramedics loaded the boy onto a stretcher. One of them, a woman with Salt Lake City General on her sleeve, nodded at Megan. "Good work. What did you do?" "Needle decompression. Second intercostal space. Pneumothorax." The paramedic's expression shifted. She looked at Megan, then at Pierce, then back at Megan. But she was already lifting the stretcher. She couldn't argue with a save. Pierce was still on the phone. His color was blue-gray when she started. She used a ballpoint pen. Just pulled it out of someone's pocket and pushed it into his chest like she'd done it 1,000 times. He said it like it was an accusation. "I need to know if she's licensed. I need her name. And I need to know how many other violations she's committed on this beach." That night, Megan sat in her hotel room. She didn't turn on the lights. Outside, Norfolk sprawled into darkness, the Atlantic somewhere beyond the parking lot, waves she couldn't see but could hear through the glass. Her phone had 17 missed calls. Seattle General had cancelled her contract. The state nursing board's inquiry was flagged as urgent. Naval Intelligence had sent a text, handler needed to meet. The faded unit patch was in her hands. Her son's company. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, a dark horse. She traced the stitching she'd sewn herself 3 weeks ago in this same room, before everything went tactical. She could have saved that boy's life without showing her hand. She could have called 911 and melted back into the crowd. She could have stayed invisible. But the boy would have been dead in 4 minutes. His lung would have collapsed completely. His heart would have stopped. All the ETA numbers in the world don't matter when you're watching someone suffocate in real time. The phone buzzed. Text from Pierce's attorney, filed with the state licensing board, inquiry into credentials and background of Megan O'Brien, RN, alleged unauthorized practice of medicine, alleged assault on minor, alleged violation of beach ordinances section 12.4 subsection F. Every door closing. Every exit blocked. The protection detail compromised. The major exposed. The mission failed. The son's last letter, the one that said Major Collins had led them through an ambush in Tikrit and made sure every family got their soldier back except hers, that man was sitting on the beach right now with no protection, no cover, no one between him and the people looking for him. The waitress at the oceanfront diner didn't ask why Megan was still there at 3 a.m., hands wrapped around cold coffee. She just kept the cup full and the overhead lights dim. Outside, the beach was empty. Moonlight sketched the sand in silver and shadow. Somewhere out there, Major Collins was alone in his darkness, and Megan O'Brien was no longer authorized to be anywhere near him. The game, as they said in military operations, was no longer hers to control. Within days, the call came at 2:02 a.m. Captain Megan O'Brien was still awake in her hotel room when her secure phone buzzed, the one with the Pentagon direct line, the one she'd kept buried in her locker at Portsmouth Naval Medical Center until the mission started. Her handler's voice was tight, controlled, the way it sounded when assets got burned. "You're extracted," he said. 8 words. That was all it took. "The Major," Megan said. "Not a question. Reassign protective detail. Full tactical team. You're compromised, Captain." The beach manager's complaints, the state nursing board investigation, the cell phone video of the incident, it's all on social media now. 17,000 shares in the last 6 hours. Your cover as a civilian nurse is gone. Megan closed her eyes. The unit patch inside her jacket lining, the one from her son's Special Forces company, the stitching so careful she'd done it herself in the barracks at Fort Bragg, suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "How long until extraction?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning. 0600 hours. Military transport to Joint Base Anacostia Bolling. New assignment briefing at 1000. You'll be reassigned to the Pentagon Medical Team. Trauma protocol and vulnerability assessment for classified operations." She heard the rain outside starting to hammer the parking lot. The hotel overlooked the beach where Major Collins sat in the darkness, his service dog alert beside him, waiting for protection that would no longer be her responsibility. The mission to safeguard the Major, the one who'd commanded her son's unit in Tikrit before an IED stole his vision and clarity, had failed. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Nothing was supposed to end like this. "Understood," Megan said. "Captain, you did everything by the book. What happened wasn't your fault." She ended the call. At 3 a.m., Megan sat in an empty oceanfront diner, the kind of place where tourists never ventured, where the fluorescent lights buzzed like insects trapped in plastic. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago. The ceramic cup sat untouched, condensation pooling beneath it on the Formica table. Her hands lay flat on the surface, steady as always, unmarred by the trembling that would have broken a weaker person. She stared at her reflection in the dark window beyond the diner's counter, just a woman in scrubs, her face illuminated by the neon glow of a Budweiser sign, her short dark hair catching the light like a military cut because it was a military cut, just like it had been for 23 years. The beach was a dark shape in the distance, visible through the rain streaking the glass. She could see the public access point where Major Collins would be sleeping in the van they'd rented, his service dog Sergeant curled against his chest, both of them breathing in the salt air that carried memories of operations neither would ever forget. Somewhere out there, Derek Pierce was probably sleeping soundly in his waterfront house, his profit margins intact, his corruption still buried deep in dummy companies and inflated vendor contracts. The world made no sense. It never had. Megan pressed her fingers against the faded unit patch sewn inside her jacket lining, feeling the outline of her son's insignia through the fabric. 23 years of service. For combat tours. 2 Purple Hearts. A bronze star she'd never wear in public because the citation was classified. And now she was being pulled, reassigned, rendered useless to the one person she'd been allowed to protect. Wednesday morning came grey and wet. Megan sat on a public bench just outside the beach manager's jurisdiction, her position calculated precisely, on public property, where Pierce couldn't legally touch her, where she could see everything but appear to be doing nothing. She had binoculars around her neck, the kind birders carried, the kind that didn't look military until you knew what to look for. She raised them toward the beach, scanning the dunes, the public access point, watching for the Major's arrival. At 9:43 a.m., Major Collins appeared. His physical therapist was with him, a young woman with kind eyes and the careful movements of someone trained to guide the blind. The Major's service dog moved ahead, his golden coat bright against the grey morning. They took the public access path that curved down to the sand, toward the rehabilitation area where the Major did his morning walks now, quarter-mile out, quarter-mile back, his body rebuilding itself one step at a time. Megan tracked them through the binoculars, her breathing steady, her heartbeat normal. This was how she would protect him now. From a distance. Unseen. Useless. And then she saw him. A man in his 50s, Middle Eastern, with the gait of someone rebuilding their body. He was walking with his own physical therapist, moving slowly down the public access path, favoring his left leg. The sun caught his face as he turned, and the binoculars suddenly felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds in Megan's hands. His eyes found her first. Then his whole body went rigid, the way men do when they see a ghost. He stopped. His therapist turned to him, asking something Megan couldn't hear. But his eyes never left the bench where Megan sat motionless, the binoculars lowering slowly in her hands. Rashid. The bomb maker. The insurgent she'd captured in Tikrit, the one she'd later saved from execution by testifying before a military tribunal about his intelligence cooperation, about the fact that he'd been coerced into bomb-making by the Ansar al-Islam cell commander, that his information had saved 143 American lives and at least twice that many Iraqi civilians. The one she'd watched walk free, years ago, wondering if she'd made the right choice. He approached the bench slowly. His therapist tried to guide him in another direction, but he shook his head, his eyes locked on Megan's face like she was the only solid thing in a world that had been trembling for 5 years. When he reached the bench, he whispered in accented English, "Captain Lioness." The name hit like a physical blow. That's what they'd called her in Tikrit, the soldiers, the Marines, the special operations teams who'd seen her move through a firefight with the same calm most people reserved for making coffee. Captain Lioness. The rank was right. The call sign was something from another life entirely. Megan's hand moved toward the concealed weapon at her hip before recognition flickered across her face. Her eyes went from threat assessment to something softer, then back to stone. Rashid, she said. 5 letters. His entire history, contained in a single word. I am here, he said, gesturing toward the VA facility down the beach. Medical visa. Refugee status. The Americans who promised to protect me, they kept their word. He looked down at his healing leg. Physical therapy. Reconstruction. They did not have to do this. But I testified. About the corruption in the procurement contracts. About the officers who were taking money from the bomb makers to look the other way. I have been cooperating for 5 years. Megan's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Corruption. Procurement contracts. Derek Pierce's dummy companies and inflated vendor charges suddenly didn't feel like isolated beach fraud anymore. The web was larger than she'd understood. Military supply chains. Kickbacks funding insurgent operations. The circle that had started in Tikrit was somehow still turning here, on this beach, on this morning. You're safe here, Megan said quietly. Because you are here, Rashid said. That was when the retired Marine working the pier fishing line, about 40 meters down the beach, pulled out his phone. Something in Rashid's voice, the formal military cadence, the respectful distance, all of it had triggered something in him. The Marine had an old-school bearing, the kind that came from 30 years in uniform. His eyes had gone sharp. He was searching. Megan could see him typing, his phone glowing in the grey morning light. She had maybe 2 minutes before he found something. Maybe less. Derek Pierce was already moving. He emerged from his office building with the territorial intensity of a man who sensed disruption to his controlled environment. He'd been expecting trouble since the incident at the volleyball tournament. His lawyer brother-in-law had kept him updated on the state nursing board investigation. Pierce had files ready, complaints documented, his position fortified. But a Middle Eastern man having an intense conversation with a former nurse who'd been banned from his beach? That was something new. Megan made the choice without hesitation. She stood, moved down from the public bench, and walked directly onto the beach property, the banned territory, to intercept Pierce before he could reach Rashid and the Major, who was still walking his rehabilitation circuit 50 meters away, his service dog moving with the precision of an animal that had been trained for combat. You were told to stay away from this beach, Pierce said immediately. His phone was already in his hand. This is trespassing. Private property. I'm calling Norfolk PD right now, and this time I'm pressing charges. Mr. Pierce, Megan said, her voice level, almost conversational. You need to step back. Need to. Pierce laughed, a sound like broken glass. You need to leave, or I'm having you arrested. Again. This time for criminal trespass instead of practicing medicine without a license. But Megan wasn't looking at him anymore. She was watching the Marine approach across the sand, his phone raised, his voice carrying across the beach in the way that old military men's voices did, trained to cut through noise and distance and anything else that tried to stop them from being heard. Captain Lioness, the Marine called out. He was reading from his phone now, his cadence shifting into something formal, ceremonial. Captain Megan O'Brien, Bronze Star with Valor. Pierce stopped. His face cycled through confusion, then irritation. The Marine continued, his voice rising, for actions during Operation Phantom Fury, leading a tactical nursing unit under direct fire. Personally treating 14 wounded while coordinating medevac under sustained enemy contact. A Navy staff car turned into the parking lot. The retired Marine's weathered hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, the screen glowing against the afternoon sun. He'd been casting from the pier when the words reached him, Captain Lioness. His jaw tightened. He knew that call sign. Everyone in the community knew that call sign. 3 tours. 2 Purple Hearts. A bronze star that still hadn't been declassified until he saw the citation scroll across military networks 18 months ago. He turned from the railing, moved toward the cluster forming around Rashid and Megan, his boots leaving prints in the damp sand. The phone screen reflected off his weathered face as he began reading, his voice steady as a diesel engine idling in a garage. Captain Megan O'Brien. Bronze Star with Valor. For actions during Operation Phantom Fury. He looked up from the screen, his eyes finding hers. Leading a tactical nursing unit under direct fire. 14 wounded treated. 7 medevacs coordinated while sustained enemy contact continued. Each word fell into the sand like a stone dropping into still water. The gathered families had gone quiet. Someone's child stopped running. The sound of the wave seemed to amplify, that relentless white noise of foam and undertow, the beach's heartbeat. Personally administering hemostatic measures to a 23-year-old Lance Corporal with catastrophic femoral hemorrhage while hostile fire impacted within 30 meters of her position. Derek Pierce's face had gone the color of old bone. He was moving before the Marine finished the second paragraph, his voice cracking like thin ice. That's classified. That phone, where did you get that information? She's not authorized to, but his words dissolved into noise because a Navy staff car was turning into the parking lot, its dark blue paint catching the sunlight like a promise or a threat. A 2-star general emerged from the rear passenger door with the kind of presence that made the air pressure change. His dress whites were immaculate. His salute toward Megan was crisp enough to cut, his hand rising and falling with the precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. When he turned to face Pierce, there was no warmth in his expression, only the flat assessment of someone evaluating a problem that required solving. Mr. Pierce. The general's voice carried the weight of authority that couldn't be challenged or negotiated with. The investigation your legal actions triggered into Captain O'Brien's credentials led our Naval Criminal Investigative Service auditors directly to your vendor contracts. All of them. Pierce's phone had started ringing. It rang again. And again. His hand moved toward his pocket but stopped. The general continued, his words falling with the inevitability of artillery. 11 dummy companies registered to shell addresses. Inflated beach equipment leases running $47,000 monthly for supplies that were never delivered. $200,000 in kickbacks from the concession fraud funneled through your brother-in-law's law practice. Pierce's face had begun to twitch at the left corner of his mouth, a small thing, almost imperceptible, but it was the face of someone watching his empire collapse in real time. Your own attempt to discredit Captain O'Brien created the paper trail NCIS needed. Every complaint you filed. Every call you made. Every threat you documented in writing became evidence of witness intimidation in a federal fraud prosecution. The MPs had already appeared, 2 of them, moving with the fluid precision of apex predators who knew exactly where they were going. They didn't use restraints. They didn't need to. Pierce followed them toward the staff car with the gait of someone moving through water, his phone ringing, still ringing, the screen lighting up with names that would no longer take his calls. His lawyer brother-in-law. His shell company partners. His city council contacts. All suddenly unreachable. The nursing board complaint he'd filed against Megan was now evidence. His beach manager credentials had been suspended pending investigation. The corporate tournament sponsors were pulling their contracts in real time. Megan could see the staff taking down the sponsor banners, the folding tables being cleared with the efficiency of people trying to distance themselves from something contaminated. Rashid stepped forward, his physical therapist waiting respectfully at a distance, and extended his hand toward Megan. Captain. His accent was soft, his eyes bright with something that looked like gratitude mixed with sorrow. I came back to this city to heal. I knew I would see the woman who saved my life. He pressed her hand between both of his, a gesture of respect that transcended language. The gathered families had begun approaching her now, the mother of the volleyball player, his father, siblings, all moving with the hesitant grace of people who suddenly understood they'd been standing beside someone extraordinary. The jogger who'd passed her that morning was lingering, nodding with recognition. The Marines who'd been fishing from the pier had gathered on the sand, their weathered faces arranged in something that looked like respect approaching reverence. The room, if a beach could have a room, had gone so quiet you could hear the seabirds arguing over territory in the dunes. The general handed Megan a sealed envelope. New assignment. Portsmouth Naval Medical Center. Training tactical medical units. We need what you know in the field. He paused, his eyes measuring her with the kind of assessment that came from evaluating soldiers across 3 decades. Your son's commander told me about him. About the choice you made. Megan's hand moved instinctively inside her jacket, touching the faded Special Forces unit patch sewn into the lining, the same unit her son had served, had died serving. She didn't speak. The general didn't seem to expect a response. He saluted again, crisp and final, then walked back toward the staff car. The afternoon light had begun shifting toward amber, the sun lowering toward the water line, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. 6 months became a measured length of time. Winter turned to spring. Derek Pierce's medical licenses were permanently revoked. The nursing board investigation concluded that his complaints against Megan constituted witness intimidation in a federal case, and his own medical credentials were permanently suspended. He'd been sentenced to 18-month supervised community service, driving a white VA medical supply van, delivering wound care packages to the veterans facility where Major Collins had begun volunteering. The facility where 347 service members received rehabilitation for trauma and amputation and blindness and the kinds of wounds that didn't show on skin. Pierce carried boxes past men and women who recognized him. Who knew his name? Who understood what he'd tried to do? He didn't meet their eyes anymore. Couldn't. Megan stood on the beach at dawn, her son's former commander beside her, both watching the sun rise over the water in silence. Major Collins's service dog sat between them, its dark eyes tracking the movement of seabirds along the waterline. The beach was empty except for the sound of waves, that endless rhythm that had been there before Pierce and would remain long after. The premium cabana spaces had been converted to public access 3 months ago. No corporate banners. No sunburned tourists in polo shirts. Just families who would arrive later, unaware that this stretch of sand had witnessed a reckoning that cost one man everything. Your son talked about you, the major said quietly. His voice carried the careful precision of someone who'd learned to navigate the world without sight, calibrating distance and intention through sound and instinct. About the nurse who became a soldier because she couldn't stand watching others carry what she could carry herself. Megan didn't respond. Her hand briefly touched the unit patch inside her jacket, that small rectangle of faded fabric that had once identified her son's unit before it identified her own. The patch felt like a heartbeat under her fingers. The major extended his hand, and she helped him to his feet. They began walking the waterline together, the service dog leading with the certainty of purpose, as the first joggers began appearing on the beach and families unfolded beach chairs and children ran toward the breaking waves. A woman jogging past nodded respectfully. An older man fishing from the shallows turned and watched them walk past, his eyes bright with recognition. The general's new orders had her training the next generation of tactical medical units at Portsmouth Naval Medical Center, teaching the next generation what she'd learned in Tikrit, what she'd paid for in sand and blood, and the unit patch she carried like a prayer next to her heart. The sun continued rising, burning away the gray of early morning, and the beach filled with the sounds of living, laughter and seagulls and the endless percussion of the waves. Megan walked beside her son's commander, both of them moving in the kind of silence that comes from having already survived the worst, from having already paid prices that couldn't be articulated or measured or exchanged for anything except the ability to keep walking. The service dog's harness caught the increasing light. The water sparkled. And somewhere in the city behind them, a white medical supply van was being loaded for its morning route, and a man was learning what it meant to carry boxes instead of credentials, to serve without authority, to exist in the margins where consequences finally arrived. Sometimes the bravest warriors carry stethoscopes, not guns. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more untold stories of the heroes walking among us, the nurses, the medics, the ones who sacrifice without fanfare. Like this video, comment with your thoughts about hidden strength and quiet courage, and share this with someone who needs to know that the person standing beside them might just be carrying secrets that saved lives. Because the real battle isn't fought on beaches or in hospitals. It's fought every single day by people like Captain O'Brien, and the world needs to know their names.